Welcome to Transform Now, a podcast focused on intelligent automation and brought to you by SS&C Blue Prism. On this program, we talk about how organizations globally are rethinking the way they operate, utilizing process orchestration and AI-enabled digital workers to free up humans to do the work that matters most. We also share insights and tips on how you can embrace this new way of working and unleash your full potential. Let's get into the show.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Marchuk, and welcome to the Transform Now podcast. I have with me two special guests on this episode. From our friends at G.A.I. Insights, I have CAO and co-founder Paul Baier and AI analyst David DeLallo. We are going to be talking with Paul and David about an article that y'all wrote with John Ziokla, who's not on the podcast today because we actually did a separate episode with him about a dozen episodes ago. But this article that you wrote appeared in the Harvard Business Review and is titled, "Your Organization Isn't Designed to Work with GenAI." It's a fascinating look on how our work is changing and how we need to adapt our organizations to keep up with this new pace of change. So welcome, David and Paul.
Thanks. Really happy to be here. So as you mentioned, we're doing some work for G.A.I. Insights as an analyst and also as their content advisor, because my background is actually also in publishing and AI. Previously, I worked at McKinsey for 6 years. I ran the AI thought leadership program there, did a similar function for IBM. So have a mix of insight into AI and insight into content around AI.
Great. And Michael, my background's 25 years on the enterprise software side. So I was on the vendor side. And I think relevant to this conversation, I was an executive at an AI company for 5 years with traditional AI.
Gotcha. So you guys are steeped in AI for sure. What inspired you to write this article, David?
Yeah, I think the inspiration of this was just in doing work with clients and others that you see a struggle, right? People know that this technology is transformative, that it's ready to be used in some form today, and they want to go ahead and start applying it. And there's lots of reasons why there's some struggles in various organizations for that. But one of the reasons we were finding is because it's being treated in some ways like a typical technology that we've seen in the past, but it's very different, right? It's general purpose, first of all, and it's very flexible. One of the things we talk about in the article is how kind of business process reengineering, which is a great framework, it's been successful, and there are elements of it that apply to generative AI today. It actually needs a little bit of a different paradigm because of this flexibility, because when users are working with it, it's a shared performance of a task rather than AI taking on a particular task and automating it and the user kind of functioning with their roles around it. It's a lot more iterative, especially today, and it will, I think, still be to some degree going forward. So that was the inspiration of trying to help people understand that this is different. So you need to use a different way to implement it.
That makes sense. And I want to come back to that in a little while to ask you a different question, because something you said sparked something in my imagination here. Paul, with this article, obviously it's reaching a very large audience. How do you hope that the article will impact the readers?
I think certainly many of the senior leaders have called the whole basic reengineering movement. That was really a movement from thinking functionally about organizations to thinking like process. Huge value. Many corporations did it. And we see a similar thing, but slightly different over here. Some of the things that David talked about, the process is changing. You got to take that process and break it down into subtasks. In each of those subtasks, you have to figure out if the robot's going to lead, the AI, or you can have the human lead. But you also need to sit in a context where this technology is changing so much that who takes the lead is going to change as well as the technology. And there's a lot of other implications around that. How do we think about compensation when productivity is going through that? How do we future-proof and have systems that are large language model agnostic here? So it's a whole nother improvement plateau, but the improvement plateau is changing and increasing. And that was a little different than what we saw in the reengineering waves.
Gotcha. That makes sense. You both said something very similar to what I was thinking about diving in. That's off script because that's based on some of the things I wanted to ask you on the article. You both talked about this. We have to do things differently here. And I know in the past, going on this concept of zero-based redesign where, hey, we're just going to rethink the whole process. Do you think that's where we're at, leveraging Gen AI in this new paradigm?
Yes, I think it is, because the inclination, as we talked about earlier, would be to say, okay, one of the things that Gen AI does is it automates. So let me look at the tasks that are in a workflow today and which one can be automated. But that automation, first of all, is only one benefit from it. I think augmentation is a huge benefit. And so you really do need to start with what are the tasks in a workflow. And then, as Paul mentioned, thinking about, is the technology going to take a lead in a task? Is the person going to? And then you really, instead of, I don't even know if I call it like zero based process reengineering. I would think of it more as you need to create an environment for the process to evolve the way that it should evolve to be optimized between the user and the machine, right? Because there's going to be a back and forth between the user and the machine. And then, as Paul mentioned, the technology is going to keep advancing. Also, the AI is learning, right? As you go along, you're learning as you go along. So there's no way, I feel, to really say, okay, here's what the process looks like from A to Z, and here's how it's going to work, because it's just going to keep changing. So it's really more, and I'm sure we'll talk about later, about creating protocols and kind of guardrails, because you can't just let it run willy-nilly of how the process is going to evolve, but you need to just provide some parameters so that there's still some room for that flexibility and for that kind of even personalized in some ways process to evolve.
Paul, what are your thoughts on, he mentions the impact piece of it and this evolution? The processes themselves may have to evolve. How does a business, or how do executives in these businesses try to keep up with that evolution when they're still trying to operate the current business?
Yeah, so I think a couple things. I think one, on the process evolution of zero thing, I think a critical aspect of this is that Gen AI really lights up value from unstructured data in a way we've not seen before. So that's causing a lot more vectors of value on as you look through these things. So what does it mean to have very cost-effective access to all the different customer interactions in the past if you're automating a customer support function? So the opportunity space is increasing to add value, which is a little different than pure automation. I think from an executive standpoint, one of the things we see a lot with executives we work for is there's a lot of different opportunities out there. There's almost too many opportunities here. So how do you prioritize them? And what we really recommend is really thinking first and foremost about operating leverage and through the income statement, to keep it pretty simple. All the executives and boards understand income statement. Let's figure out which line item we're working on, revenue or cost, and let's focus on that and get our organizations to make some quick wins in 6 to 12 months and to get the learning train moving. Unlike so many other transformations here, this technology, as David mentioned, is very transferable. Before we did a supply chain implementation with SAP procurement, you couldn't pick up 90% of the people in technology and move it over to HR. These you can. So you can move over the process redesign, the technology, the learning. So it's really a incredibly powerful tool. And that's why it creates so many different opportunities that paralyzes some organizations. So let's pick one or two that align with the business here that we can clearly prove the ROI against the income line item and income statement, and then get moving.
So that makes a lot of sense, especially when you look at this organizational impact. And I want to zoom in on that one, because in the article, you really do a great job with this. You mentioned that the current business processes and the process redesign concepts don't fully take into account the nuances of how people and AI or systems interact. So how does this design for dialogue framework that you mentioned in the article influence the organizational structure and the roles in a company who are trying to implement AI?
Yeah, I can start off with answering that one. In some ways, when you think about organizational structure and how it's been evolving over the past few decades, it's a little bit of just a continuation of that to some degree. You think about my background is also largely in marketing. I think of the marketing function from 20 years ago, right? You didn't have a marketing analytics person on the marketing team. You had IT coming in and saying, hey, there's this new software or something, we're going to install it. Now with AI and analytics having come a long way now, what team doesn't have a marketing analytics person on it? So that's a sort of an organizational structure change right there. It's a change in the marketing team. And then you think, okay, now they're also increasingly creating self-serve analytics for the marketers. Now the marketers also got different skills. They've got to understand how to view the analytics, which ones are important, how do you act on these? These are newer competencies. And then it's a new relationship, right, between the analytics person on the team and kind of the classical marketer. Or think back to focus groups, market research. That was the way to get customer insights. Now a marketer can actually create a focus group of AIs, right? Just using ChatGPT. So I think functions are going to change. And think about, we're just at the beginning of AI agents starting to become a realistic prospect. They're going to perform a bunch of different functions for the marketer. What does that marketing team look like? Or is there even a marketing team as we know it today at all? Not that we won't need marketers at all, but they're going to need even more skills. And maybe they take on the roles of other people. They're now taking on some of the roles of the analytics team. They may be taking on some of the roles of sales. It's definitely going to change the structure.
Yep, that makes sense. David or Paul, maybe you can walk us through this whole design for dialogue framework. What is that? What does it mean for these organizations who are trying to implement AI?
Yeah, so I think part of it is at first awareness that this is fundamentally different here. If we look at the tools before, we were doing a lot of automation, but we were in control and knew the boundaries of capabilities. To keep it really simple, we went from a manual hammer on a roof construction project to a power drill. But we always knew the limits of the power drill capability here. This is totally different. We haven't really redesigned processes with tools that are smarter than all of us or most of us and are getting smarter every single day. So the AI we have today, and we all keep saying is worse AI, where we're going to have, what does that capability mean when we think about customer support, to pick an example here? So you have 1,000 people customer support, you're automating that. Can you get 100 out? Can you get 200 out? So what you automate, how you automate it, and have incentives to make sure people are embracing the change, embracing a learning mindset, are all really important design elements in addition to technology that wasn't there in the past. And as we talked earlier, in the past, a lot of the redesign work, you got a plateau of savings and it stayed there. This one, you're going to get on a productivity curve that's going to keep going up, and everything that we see out there, the improvement is probably going to actually increase in the next 2 to 5 years here. So it is a very different whole playing field of solution space, if you will, to start it. So that's the first and foremost thing to understand.
Yeah,
I can imagine.
Sorry, I was
Dave,
just
go ahead.
going to add that one way that we try to just simplify the framework is looking at it as 3 components. There's the task analysis, which is similar to what you would have done in BPR. Then there's the interaction protocols, though, that we started to talk about a little earlier. That's a little different, more, again, about creating that environment for the process to evolve with guardrails. And then there's feedback loops. Task analysis, obviously, that's pretty self-explanatory. I'd like to take another second or two, though, to talk about those interaction protocols because they're really important, right? They're, as we mentioned in the article, they're equivalent to like team ground rules and guardrails. They're trying to give a sketch of how the human and AI should interact and collaborate without a hard and fast, you must do this. So one example would be when the AI encounters something strange that it hasn't seen before, it signals for the human to come in and provide its expertise. Or let's say the AI is making a suggestion for a course of action as opposed to prescribing a course of action. And the human jumps in and adds its, as I think Paul mentioned earlier, you want to think about who's in the lead in each task. And then what is the others, AI or humans, role as the support function? And then you want to monitor that over time. So this feedback loop is really important. With BPR, a lot of times you do this big overhaul, right? And then you were done for a while. Maybe you're monitoring a little bit, you're tweaking, but like here, it's really a continual feedback loop coming from the user. You've got the technologists monitoring the interactions to make sure everything's going well. But you're also looking for things, hey, now this could maybe be fully automated because it's been completely worked out between the human and the AI, and you can just replicate this now within the machine.
And one other thing, if I may add, Michael, is that a lot of the business process we did before was, I don't know, if we're doing an order to cash automation with an SAP system here, that was a deterministic system where we had rows and columns, structured data. So when we tested that thing really well, solid, and we could keep that going. This is different. These are probabilistic tools. The same input may have different outputs. So how we think about data governance on an in-production system and how we monitor that and how we make sure it stays within responsible AI is a very different animal, and is it something new for these organizations to think through. So that's another aspect of the rollout and staffing and budgeting and expectation setting that is different.
So I want to go along those lines because I think we've seen this, and you've probably seen it more than I have even, that organizations who are, say, dabbling with Gen AI right now, they're approaching it the way they've approached other technologies in the past. As you mentioned, we put this in place, it works well, we just leave it alone and it goes. How can we help evangelize or describe to our customers or these organizations that are doing this, that this isn't the same anymore, that now you have this digital labor that is capable and will be even more capable in the future as we're rolling these processes out. So we are redesigning for a future state that doesn't exist now, using both smart people, but even smarter technology to continue the transactions, but also the interactions that we have. So how does an organization prepare for that? Because it seems like it could be very difficult to make that mental jump.
I would say, and this seems so simple and fundamental, but a big thing is the leaders actually need to dig in and use these tools. I think it was Ethan Malik says, spend at least 10 hours with these tools, right? A lot of leaders still, I think the most recent surveys from McKinsey's and others, while the usership among executives, senior executives, is higher in the early days of GenAI than you would have seen with some previous technologies, it's still only like 30%. So how could you possibly prepare and envision what is possible when you don't sit down and actually see what some of the early tools can do? And there's so many that are available even just for free that you can start to toy with, and not just the Chat GPTs and the Geminis. Go beyond that so that you can really expand your mind and see, wow, this really is different. I think it will open up the imagination and do some of that prep work for you.
Yeah, and that build on that, Michael, I assert that it would be irresponsible for any company to hire a VP who's never used a browser, because the internet's that transformative. This is in the same time. We're talking about 15 to 20 studies now, which are showing a 20% plus productivity improvement. So if you're a 1,000-person organization, that's 200 people figuratively sitting outside, ready to go to work. To treat that as a passing fad, as a novelty item, as a minor IT project is naive. So really gets back to understanding the profound nature that we're in, that we've moved from non-printing press world to printing press. We're pre and post internet. We are now pre and post GenAI, and that takes leadership. And that's why industry transformation is coming really hard and fast to some industries and some companies. And leaders need to understand, are they in the crucible, as we call it, because some of these companies, they are going to get mowed over because they're treating this as a passing fad here. So to answer your question directly, awareness and assessing. Awareness is first, and after you're aware is to assess where your industry and your company is. Where are you on the urgency spectrum?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I like the way you put that in terms of the pre and post internet, because if you think of, say, perhaps phone book printers, pre-internet had a pretty good business. Their ads were doing very well. And then the internet fundamentally changed what they did and put them out of business. And we're in the same situation now with GenAI.
And I think those type of analogies people live through, some of us are old enough to do pre and post email. Hey, Michael, fax that over to me. And you say, are you kidding me? Your email's not working? Fax it. There's no one at the fax machine right now. If it's a 30-page document, I can handle a 30-page document. I just put new paper in. That's the world. That's the kind of step
You mean you
function.
changed the role? You changed the role of
Change the
paper, is
role,
what you're saying, right?
My first job in high school was at Staples, and I remember I would sell fax machines to people and the pains of the roles.
So we look at this here. You talk about the leadership and the needs that they have. It sounds as we've broken into this new phase now in terms of having Gen AI really looking to generate some true impact in organizations if they're allowed to do so. If that Gen AI is able to be adopted properly, you're not going to have leadership styles that may be the same that got that leader to where they are now, even through the internet era, because this era has simply changed again. And that vision seems like it's a even more important aspect than your maybe technical prowess or your technical capabilities to lead an organization. Yes, you're still going to have folks who are going to need to know finances and how to manage people and how to manage business over quarter after quarter. But you're also going to have this next thing is, how do I blend our resource model to be able to take advantage of this so that we can not just survive, but actually thrive in this next era? Based on your research and insights, how do you envision the impact of generative AI on these job roles and org design as we look beyond the next 6 months?
Yeah, I know you keep hearing this over and over, but it's really true that being able to strategize, critical thinking, imagination, creativity in leadership and throughout the organization is going to be really important. And I think especially at what will be the kind of lower, less senior roles, because there's not going to be a lot of task rabbits anymore, right? Everyone's going to have a higher order of thinking to be able to survive in the organization. And then there's also, then how do you teach that? We were just recently talking about an article that we were reviewing. We do a briefing every morning at 7:30 where we review the top Gen AI news of the day. And we were just looking at one that was an interview with some academics and how they're already changing the way that they teach coding, right? Because now there's coding assistance. It's a little less about proper syntax, et cetera. It's more about how do you break down problems, right? How do you actually test and debug, which is often not directly covered in those classes. So there's so many implications, but that strategic thinking, I think, is going to be really critical.
I agree. I think we're seeing this fundamental change. Paul, when you're talking with some of these executives about where they're headed, do you see them hiring for this creativity, this innovation kind of concept at this point? Because I think, again, based on what I've seen, David, you hit it right in the nail on the head, is we have to embrace this. But are organizations actually doing that at this point?
Yeah, I think a few of them are recognizing a need for it. Not enough are. The ones, let's just stay in the crucible, legal firms. I think personally, half the billable hours are going to go away in 3 to 5 years. Outsourcing is changing radically. Entertainment, curriculum development. These industries are in a competitive necessity. And the challenge is, and we can say it at the individual level, it's also true at the company level. It's not that AI is going to take your job. It's someone knows how to use AI. So Michael, if you and I are both competitors and you upgrade 20% of your workforce to get your workforce to really get better core competencies and adaptability, curiosity, change management than and we compete for the next 3 years, you win. Not only are you producing something better, the top talent in the industry is flocking to your firm rather than mine. So I'm getting gutted on the value creation side. I'm getting gutted on the talent side, and pretty soon I'm going to get gutted on the capital side because capital is going to flow over to the leaders here. So this is non-trivial stuff for those industries. Now, not all industries like that. If you're doing a mining industry, you got some times here. But if you are in the crucible, game is on now. There's no technology risk to use existing technology to drive these 20% plus productivity changes here. And we haven't even begun to talk about how the competitive dynamics of data and digital twins and everything else is also moving industries. and it's moving the long-term competitive differentiation beachheads as well.
Yeah. And I will say on the talent front, those organizations that do recognize that they need to hire for this different skill set are not able to find those people. And that's again why I mentioned education. And it can't just happen though at the middle school, high school, college level, because there's plenty of people that are already out of school that still also may not have these skills that they need. So it's really important. It's going to be on the onus of certainly the individuals need to take their ownership of their own career and their skills, but it's going to take a village, as they say, the governments, the businesses, and the individuals to make sure that enough people have these skills so that we can really take advantage of this technology in this moment.
Would you say that this is a cultural sea change for business at this point?
Certainly cultural. I think it's an imperative. Globalization ran over companies who didn't understand how to globalize. Companies that didn't outsource get run over. Companies that didn't take advantage of supply chain in China on retail goods get run over here. Macy's didn't adjust, they get run over here. Newspapers didn't get run over. So it's way more than cultural. It's cultural, it's business plan, it's staffing, it's mentality for those industries in the crucible. And we're estimating 20 or 30% of publicly traded companies are in the crucible right now.
Interesting. We are at that point. First of all, I want to say thank you for writing this article because I think it's fantastic. It will be linked in our show notes. Folks who are listening can take a look at that article themselves. As we look toward the future, what else can we expect from your team in terms of some of the thought leadership that you're working on now?
I think go ahead, Dave.
Oh, I was going to say, I know John and I have many articles that were in the works on. I would say one that we're excited about is, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, just the frontier now is these agentic systems. So we're doing a lot of research and learning around that.
I think, Michael, from us at a higher level, we really aim and aspire to support those AI leaders in those companies here. So those companies and leaders who are putting their career on the line, who are having the debates with the board if they should spend $7 million or $14 million in GenAI this year, and because they know the change is coming, that's who we want to support. And increasingly, they're coming into more needs around benchmarking, more needs around organizational change, more needs around how to recruit and retain talent, and more needs around how to think through a technology layer that's much more in their control and doesn't have lock-in to the big three cloud providers and stuff. So how to think through this change in a way that drives and increases competitive advantage is very much in the bullseye and where we're going.
That's a great way of putting it. I really appreciate it. So thank you both, Paul and David, for joining me today. I think this conversation was fantastic. And I look forward to maybe getting you back on the show here after I see some more of your research that you're releasing, because this has been a really fantastic conversation. So thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for having us, Michael.
Thank you for listening to Transform Now, the podcast from SS&C Blue Prism. You can find all of our episodes on your favorite podcast channel, as well as YouTube. To stay on top of the hottest topics in the world of intelligent automation, subscribe now. The future of work is here.